Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم من حمده ونفخه ونفسه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm very gratified to see that yesterday we had the same problem, not this problem, but a problem, and today, so nothing is new. This is unfortunate because this is, as you see, part 3 of a talk that I had prepared. The first part was done at the end of January. The next chance I got was the second one in late February, so that was 1 month late. And then 1 month came in for Ramadan. We were closed here, so that's 3 months went on. And then I had to go away for about 3 weeks. So it's a very disjointed thing. It is unfortunate. Ideally, it should have been given 3 weekends nonstop, and the impact would have been much more robust than it otherwise is, because the subject matter was dealt with in a different way than we normally do when we are looking at a surah. That said, again, I will summarize the first talk. It is difficult to summarize the second talk, which pertained to one of the 3 sections in which the surah is divided, because each segment of it was such that if I were to summarize, it would take quite a bit of time on that. So what I propose to do is to restate part 1, comment on part 2, just what it was, and then we'll move to the part 3 today, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to finish it. This presentation has been a slightly different presentation in the sense that it introduced the concept that one should know of when doing a detailed study of the Quran, and that is to do with the context of the particular subject matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about in a particular area of the Quran, and the internal intertextual relationships. That is, one thing pointed out in abstract form in one place is explained bigger in some other place, and vice versa. Those 2 things combined are true for any dialogue, for any write-up, whether it's Quranic or non-Quranic, but for Quranic, it works quite well. And I demonstrated that in the second part, wherein the first 30 ayats of the surah were detailed, and this particular part pertained to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings for humankind in this world. So let me go through the first 2 exhibits here, which summarize the first part, okay? And then I'll just mention a couple of things about the second part, and then we'll start with the third part, okay? So this was the summary of part 1, which was January 26. And I started by saying, and I have about 10 points here to make, and then we'll move on, that a most relevant and useful approach to understanding the text, the discourse that is, of the Quran, is by means of 2 key concepts that were developed by Muslim scholars 1,000 years ago. And those are the context and the internal relationships. Now, the context of the specific situation in the Quran determines what and how the Quran speaks in that particular situation, what is more normally called the utterance of the Quran. The other key tool in the Quranic interpretation, which is tafsir, exegesis, besides the context of the situation, is the internal relationships between material in different parts of the Quran, expressed by Quranic scholars as Al-Quran yufassir ba'dahu ba'da. That is, some parts of the Quran explain other parts elsewhere in the Quran. What is given in a general way in one place is explained in detail in the other place. What is given briefly in one place is expanded in the other. Now, context and internal relationships both focus our attention on the Quranic text itself, which most certainly must take priority over any other approach to understanding and explaining the Quran. M.A.S. Abdul Halim, author of this discourse on Surah Al Rehman, opts to adopt the merciful as his translation of Ar Rahman, the one who extends his mercy in the form of blessings that have been listed in the verses of this surah, most particularly in the first 30 ayat. This preferred meaning, the merciful for Ar-Rahman, Abdul Halim claims, is borne out by the context of the Surah Ar-Rahman itself. Now, Section 1, so as I said, this surah has been divided into three parts. Section 1, Allah's blessings for the humankind in this world. The refrain, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاهِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, someone call it the question, I call it the refrain, because it's a question with a certain qualification. It's got some rhetoric on it, it's got some mockery and taunt on it. But anyways, that refrain in this section appears 8 times. Ayat 1 through 30 deal with the blessings in the world for humankind as well as for the jinn. In it, Ayat 13 challenges the men and the jinn, that is, the ones who are addressed, the addressee, for the first time in the surah. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? This challenge, this refrain, is repeated afterwards throughout the surah. Section 2 is the punishment on Judgment Day, and the refrain here, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاهِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, appears 7 times, less than the Section 1. Ayat 31 through 45 contain a challenge for men and jinn, those that the Section 1 has been addressed to escape Allah's judgment. In other words, it says, well, I challenge you whether you can escape my judgment. However, as the reader finds out that the guilty shall not escape the punishment, whose existence these deniers had repeatedly denied in this world. Section 3 then pertains to the rewards on Judgment Day, and the refrain appears here 16 times. So the refrain appears most in rewards. Ayat 46 through 77 deal with blessings in the rewards of 2 classes of believers. 3 ayat, Ayat 1, Ayat 27, which appears towards the end of Section 1, and Ayat 78, which is the last one, fuse the whole of Surah Al Rehman into one solid unity. Signification of these 3 ayat is that they pertain exclusively to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that was the summary of the first talk I had given, where I had introduced these concepts and then introduced these sections. And for those who may be interested, the best thing you can do if you wish to know more about this is to go through these presentations, either video or just on the computer, in one fell swoop, and then it'll have its intended impact. Anyway, that said, Surah Al Rehman is, and as I said, I've taken this from Abdul Halim's book, Understanding the Quran, which was written about a quarter of a century ago. It is an illustration of how the Quran explains itself. In other words, in this surah, this surah is one of the illustrations of how the Quran itself explains itself. That is, you don't have to have any external need to look into in order for you to see what the surah is saying. An illustration of how a surah, here Surah Al Rahman, exhibits a particular style of the Quranic text. If you were to read Surah Fatiha, if you were to read Surah Waqiyah, if you were to read Surah Al-Asr, you will notice that the styles are different. In other words, it's a very stylistic text, the Quran. And this style comprises a variety of things. Specifically, for example, in the Surah Al-Rahman, the key features of the style that are embedded in Surah Al-Rahman include 4 things. There is a resonance throughout the Quran, which is the easiest to perceive. On, mostly. Sometimes it's a little bit different. And that, after a while, gets to you into a poetic stance, mental stance, and it has its own beauty. Then the structure of the verses are quite tight. They're very condensed in 4 or 5 words. In this particular surah, a very comprehensive idea is presented, and those internal relationships that I alluded to before come in handy. That is, you find that it's very terse here, but if you go through various other areas in the Quran, and I illustrated that last time we were here when talking about the first 30 ayat, that you find more detail somewhere else about this. So it's a fairly tight and condensed structure of quite a few of these verses, for which we need the interrelationships, cross references to go to in order to get more out of the surah than otherwise. And then the other thing here is that there is a contrast within and between the verses. So, for example, in one verse, you may find a contrast, or in 2 verses, you may find a contrast. One in verse one thing, and the other one is another thing, and there is a contrast. And then there is a duality between and within the verses. So there is always a duality that'll come in, which is why on, which is a dual plural, not more than two, dual plural in Arabic, ends always in an, to kaziban, two of you denying. Okay. So that was how we introduced the section 1, that is ayat 1 through 30 of the Quran. In it, mostly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outlined the blessings, and he illustrated by saying, the sun and the moon and this and that, and all those things came in. And I paid special attention in bringing out quite a few internal relationships to get more out of those ayat. And in there, time and again, it was one blessing after another, one blessing after another. And then the rhetorical question, that is the refrain, kept coming in. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ? Which of these favors then shall you both deny? Both meaning jinn and mankind. Because I had explained that particular refrain in section 1, and I'm not going to summarize section 1 here because, as I said, it's not easy for me. I tried it, but it didn't work. So I will just have one exhibit here which takes care of the فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, which was ayat 13, which is why it appeared in section 1, Allah's blessings in this world. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, which then of your sustainer, that is your Lord's blessings, some people call it favors, some people call it mercies, do you both deny? Now, the word Rabb in this, Rabbikuma, Kuma is you both as Lord, okay? Lord of you two, is related to verb rabba. And rabba means to bring up, to care for, or to sustain someone. So when here it comes in rabbikuma, which normally is translated as your sustainers or your lords, here, once you know where the word Rabb is coming from, it's coming from someone to bring up someone, to care for someone, or to sustain someone. Here we should take this Rabbikuma, Allah's lordship, as a caring lordship. In other words, He's your Lord, yes, but He's also your sustainer. He looks out after you, He brings you up. And therefore, it is a very caring lordship. This nuanced point is very significant because this particular refrain comes 31 times in this particular surah. Every time you listen to Rabbikuma, remember that it is your caring lordship who is giving you these blessings. And it is particularly more significant, the nuance, because in this particular refrain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, challenging, which of these will you deny? All along, there are people who continue to deny this. And he is saying, you are denying those blessings that I have given you, and I am a caring lordship. I care for you, and yet you deny my blessings. First of all, these are blessings. You should be thankful. No, you're not thankful, but you're also denying them. You're saying, no, they are not it. And meanwhile, here I am caring for you. So there is this nuance, and it's important to remember because we are going to recite this thing 31 times in this surah. The question, the refrain that is, which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? It comes after enumeration of the blessings surrounding men, and it is a rhetorical question that can rightly be called a cornering challenge to men. So every time it comes in this surah, it becomes a challenge to you. Which of these are you going to deny? And why are you going to deny? Why deny it? When it's coming from it. So consider as it comes in, you say, this is a challenge for me. Am I going to deny it or am I going to accept it? And am I going to recognize that these are blessings that are being given to me? And so if you use your mind, it makes denial vis-a-vis Rahman's favors, his blessings, utterly futile. This is now your caring Lord, Rabbikuma, showing your folly and your ingratitude. 31 times he's reminding you, okay? Even later on when he's talking about rewards, he's again reminding you for a slightly different reason. In the portion of punishment, the second section, he's again reciting this, bringing this particular refrain, and there is a taunt. Remember I told you, which of this will you deny? You denied it, now here's the punishment. It appears in three sections. The same refrain appears in three sections, but it appears with three different nuanced aspects. In the first one, here are the blessings. Which of you are you going to deny? And you say, no, I don't deny. I accept it. Second one, when the punishment section comes in, he's saying, which of these will you deny? And he's saying, remember, you were denying then. Which of these are you going to deny now that punishment is here? In the third section, now he's talking about the rewards for the ones who never denied it. And he's reminding them again, remember, I told you then, and now and then you accepted it. Well, here is your reward. Which of these are you going to remind? Obviously, you're not going to remind anyone. So there is this nuance in this refrain in three sections. Same refrain, but there is a different nuance. This is the bariki in Urdu. This is the nuance in English, which one should recognize because this is a very soft, very resonant, very beautifully styled surah of Quran. Okay, unless and until you appreciate the poetic aspect of it, the stylistic nature of this surah, the surah is not going to appeal to you. Unless you differentiate these three sections, the surah is not going to appeal to you. It will not have its intended impact. By way of internal relationships, such a challenge to deny the much obvious blessings and signs of Ar-Rahman is referred to elsewhere in the Quran. And here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at least interrelationships that I have pointed out, which allude to this particular aspect again and again in the whole of Quran. So I've taken out one illustration, ayat 55, Surah Al-Najm. About which then of your sustainers, favors, blessings do you still remain in doubt? Here it says doubt rather than tukazibuna. Here it says tatamara. Okay? And other ayat in the Quran bring out more on this particular refrain. So the function of this question, this refrain, which appears 31 times in Surah Rahman, is that of a concluding formula. In other words, in three parts. First, he's giving you the blessings, he's punishing those who denied, he's giving rewards to those who accept. In all of these, it becomes sort of a concluding formula. Allah Ta'ala presents a subject, and here's a concluding formula. He presents the subject by pairs, here's the concluding formula. After the first appearance here in ayat 13, from here on, this concluding formula in the form of a refrain, I would call it a rhetorical question, marks the end of a pair. The pairing is very vital in the surah. Only when a pair is completed, there is this concluding refrain, which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? So now, I'm not going to, as I said, delve on the second part of this, which was done in the end of February. But I would like to talk about the ayat 29 and 30, which ended that particular part. Primarily, it's on Allah's blessings in this world. So ayat 29, everyone in heaven and on earth pleads with Allah. Okay, now remember, it's section 1, it is about this world. Everyone in heaven and on earth pleads with Allah, and every day in this world, Allah manifests itself for you in yet another wondrous way. Okay, and then comes this refrain, which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Okay, now ayat 29 has a pair, which is why after that comes this refrain. Remember, I said pair, and then comes the refrain. What is that pair? The pleading of humankind, okay? Everyone in heaven and on earth pleads with Allah. And Ar-Rahman's attention to these pleadings. Every day, everyone in heaven and on earth pleads with him, and every day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests itself in yet another wondrous way. In other words, he is doing his tasks, attending to what you are beseeching. So that's a pair. Because the pair is complete in 29, it is followed by the refrain in ayat 30. Now, up to this point, the ayat have dealt with this world. Immediately following this, we have sections 2 and 3, comprising ayat 31 through 78. The part of Surah Al Rehman that deals with the next world. So this ayat 29 is a bridge between this world and the next world, so that we have yet another pairing. Here, this world in section 1, and the hereafter, the next world in sections 2 and 3. The needs of human beings and Ar-Rahman's attention to them exist in both worlds, here and the hereafter, another pair. So now we move on to section 2. And section 2, we are out of this world into the hereafter. Allah's punishment in the hereafter for those who denied his favors in this world, which was discussed in ayat 1 through 30 in section 1. And this section goes up to ayat 45. We shall attend to you we shall attend to you two huge armies. And the armies are of jinn and humankind. So this section begins with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now saying, we shall attend to you two huge armies. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you both deny? Now this refrain in this section is coming primarily directed towards those who denied, who already denied. Why is it coming here? Well, you were denying that. Remember, you kept on denying that. Now, what do you say about denying? Okay, it's in this taunting form. In this punishment section, this refrain comes again and again, reminding those who denied, oh God, he told me so many times over there and I did not accept them, I denied them. So here it is coming, taunting again and again and again to you. So in the prior pair, 29 and 30, the pairing was between the pleading of humankind and Allah Al-Rahman's attention to these pleadings. Here in 31, we see that Ar-Rahman will make time to judge men and jinn. Note the two pairings here. There is the pair of the army of humankind and the army of jinn. A pair. And there is the pairing of the armies of jinn and men versus Ar-Rahman attending now to deal with them. Different. Two pairs, not one pair, two pairs. Allah has power over them, even if they gather all together as two massive armies. Al-Thaqalan is translated here as two massive, heavily moving armies. Being weighty, very heavy army, being weighty is an element of strength for men and jinn here. However, This very weightiness will be shown to prove to be a hindrance in the following ayat, where these armies are shown to be too cumbersome to escape. They put together these two armies, the mankind and jinn are all here, but this heaviness does not help them, rather it hinders them. By way of internal relationships, remember I alluded to the internal relationships in part 1 and part 2. I just point out one, Al-Isra, ayat 88. Even if all the men were jinn and jinn were together, they would not be able to, and it refers to, overcome Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's might. So this reference is cross-referencing this particular ayat 31. And in this section, I'm not going to make too many internal relationships, which is why I did most of it in the first section to get the point across that the context and the internal relationships are two key aspects in order to fully understand the Quran the way it should be. And I pointed out quite a few cross-references in that section for this. But you can find cross-references for this section also if you were to dwell on it on your own. We may also note here a shift in Arabic. It's called iltifat, which is a very key stylistic element of the Quran, which has a very strong purpose. If you were to go to ayat 21 through 30, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was referred to in the third person, he. Which of his, he. Here, from talking about Ar-Rahman in the third person, he, to Allah himself challenging them, we shall attend to you. Allah now is talking about himself in the first person plural. He's not talking about third person. Now is the time for punishment and rewards. And here the narrative turns to where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now talking in first person. In his first person mightiness, we, not I, we. Challenging men, here the deniers, speaking in the first person divine plural we. Such a shift in speech makes the challenge فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ in this section where punishment is being handed out much more awesome and all the more effective. In other words, in section 1, he was saying, which of them are you going to deny? Now the deniers are here. Now the refrain is being sent to them, and they're not thinking about he. Allah Ta'ala is speaking to them directly. So that refrain becomes awesome, fearful, and it has got more impact, more effectiveness than otherwise. Back in the world, it was being told to you in the Quran, he, and you say, oh, well, now he is directly coming. Now he is accosting you in a royal we. There is no defense. There is no escaping. He's right there. He's there. And so the iltifat, the stylistic change, has its purpose. It doesn't happen accidentally. This iltifat takes place quite a number of times in the Quran. There's another point in this surah also that you will see that. Now, the commentators had to ask themselves, where is the blessing, bounty, favor here, as well as in the remaining ayat of this section, which speaks of punishing the sinners? Why is there the refrain after each pairing? I have alluded to you as to why it is, but I just brought it again in case you missed it. In other words, the blessings were there and you were being asked which of them are you going to deny, but now punishment is here. So why are we talking about blessings here now? The punishment, of course, is for those who denied Allah's blessings in the world. The refrain then was for those who may deny the blessings. Now in the hereafter, in retrospect, that is done. In retrospect, it looks so futile to have been ungrateful and to have denied those blessings. It seems so foolish to have denied and rebuffed such a bounteous and powerful Lord who, They should have known, will no doubt judge them, and that the denier's denial shall have the due punishment. The blessings in this section need to be understood to be the reminder of blessings Allah had given them in the world. You see, it's just an elaboration of what I was just saying. That is over. Why is this being repeated? To remind them, of what was given to you, what you were told to do, but you rebuffed me, you denied my blessings, you denied my existence. And so it comes again and again. And the guy is saying, the denier is saying, oh my God, I'm not even rid of it now. Those things, those reminders are coming back again to me, yet again, even while punishment is being given to me. The refrain is mentioned in this punishment section to emphasize the denier's foolishness in addition to their ingratitude. The challenging question carries both threat and mockery in it. It is, as it were, mocking the deniers. Well, tell me now, which of all these blessings I had given you in the world that you persistently denied, shall you deny now that the punishment is being dealt out to you? We are reading all this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is painting the picture of that which we cannot imagine, the hereafter. Why is this being done to us here? Because Allah ta'ala is now telling you today in this world that if and when and if and how you deny, then this is what is going to follow. And is pounding upon it again and again and again, so that if you have denied it up until now is still the time to do it. See, this is the beauty of the Quran. He tells you what you have, and he tells you you're going to deny it. You're denying it. And then he says, if you deny it, this is what's going to happen. And you still deny it. Well, shame on us, isn't it? Refer to the following again by way of internal relationships for this ayat 31. In Al-Dukhan, ayat 50. Take him, thrust him into the depths of hell, pour over his head a torrent of scalding water. Taste this, you powerful, respected man. This is what you doubted? Cross-reference in other places in the Quran of the same theme. An-Najm, ayat 56. That it was he who destroyed in their entirety in ancient Ad and Thamud, and before them the people of Noah, who were even more unjust and insolent. That it was he who brought down the ruined cities and covered them completely with whatever fell on them. Which then of your Lord's blessings do you, the men who turned away, refer to in the earlier part of ayat 33, deny? This is a warning just like the warning sent in former times. This is the warning that is just sent in Surah Al-Najm. This is the warning that is now being related to you again in Surah Al Rehman. You see the cross-reference significance? It is a beautiful, beautiful, non-linear text. But it requires this intelligence, which again is a blessing that has come from you, which if you do not pursue this, persist on this, you're denying that blessing. In not recognizing the significance of the cross references of the Quran, we are denying the blessing that He has given. In denying a blessing, you're doing exactly what He's saying don't do in multiple number of ways. As we have noted in the first two presentations, one in January, one in February, twice in Surah Al Rehman, in ayat 27 and ayat 78, Al Rahman has been described as being Zul Jalal wal Ikram, punishing the sinners in the next world, which is described in section 2, which is here, has to do with Jalal, majesty. And Ikram, while Ikram, Ar-Rahman, bestowing honor, shows itself in the blessings of Ar-Rahman, has shown men and jinn in this world, section 1, and will show the believers in the next world described in section 3. The Zul Jalal wal Ikram, the majesty, and the Allah bestowing honor upon you are distributed all through section 1, 2, and 3. Now we come to the section 2's remaining ayats. You will notice that I have pull them all together because, as I said, cross references, I'm not going to make much because otherwise there is no time to go through this. Allah's punishment in the hereafter for those who deny his favors in this world. And as pointed out, the refrain appears 7 times. I'm not going to repeat the refrain, but I'm going to go through the English translation of the ayat, which are not the refrain. Jinn and mankind, if you can pass beyond the regions of heaven and earth, then do so. You will not pass without our authority. Our, first person plural, punishment section, directly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing you. A flash of fire and smoke will be released upon you, and no one will come to your aid. When the sky is torn apart and turns crimson in color like red hide, on that day neither mankind nor jinn will be asked about their sin. The guilty will be shown by their mark and will be seized by their forehead and their feet. This is the hell the guilty deny, but they will go round between its flames and scalding water. Okay. If you were to reflect upon it, you will find the idea of contrast and the pairing in these ayat. And after all of these illustrative things that are happening there in the punishment section, there is this refrain coming in. Now, this is 33 through 35 continued. With all their might and strength that was described in Al-Thaqalan, ayat 31, men and jinn cannot run away when Allah is attending to their judgment. The context here requires that jinn be introduced first. In this ayat, jinn is being introduced first and then mankind, since they seem to have more power to penetrate heaven and earth. Let us refer to the internal relationship observed in that ayat 88. It says, even if all mankind and jinn came together to produce something like this Quran, they could not produce anything like it, however much they helped each other. The heavens which Ar-Rahman has raised up and made firm in this world will split and redden in the new order of things in the afterworld hereafter. Here, raised up and made firm. There, redden and split hereafter, pairs. In this world, they've been asked again and again in this surah, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. In the hereafter, they will no longer be asked. The taunt will be there, but they're not going to be asked. It will become known by their marks, okay, on their foreheads. The pairing structure is maintained throughout. The guilty will be seized by their forelock and their feet. They will wander between hellfire and boiling water. There is no refrain, by the way, if you were to look into the Quran, into the surah, between 43 and 44, because the pair has not been completed in ayat 43. This is the hell the guilty deny, ayat 43. It takes 44, but they will go round between its flames and scalding water. This is now the pair, 43 plus 44, and then the refrain follows in A45. So I'm just simply trying to point out, when you're going to go and reflect more deeply in this surah, sometimes you say, well, he said the pair ayat. No. In this particular case, for example, it takes 2 ayat to make a full pair, and then the refrain comes on. An important observation here. It is the context of a Surah Al Rehman that affects the way the treatment of the guilty in this section of the surah is presented. They are surrounded, seized by their foreheads and feet, and roaming between hell's flames and the scalding water. Being surrounded in this way reminds us of being surrounded in this world from all directions by the favors, alai, that is, blessings which they presumed to deny. You see the point? In this world, you're surrounded by the blessings. You denied them in the punishment section, they are surrounded. Okay? They're surrounded, seized by their foreheads and feet, roaming between hell's flames and scalding water. You see the difference? If you see if you were to reflect upon it, you find that, yes, it's quite the opposite. There is a contrast, okay? And here I introduced, missed it, yeah. Here I introduced Surah Al Waqiyah, as Brother Mamdu, when he dwelt upon this surah, went back and forth with 55 because he saw quite a few similarities. But anyway, here's being surrounded in this way reminds us of them being surrounded in this world from all directions by the favors, blessings which they presume to deny. In other contexts, for example, Surah Al-Waqiyah, the sinners are in the hell. Al-Waqiyah, ayat 41, but those on the left, what people they are. They will dwell in the midst of scorching winds and scalding water. Fi samumin wahamin. And we'll have some more similarities between 56 and 55 and 56, Rahman and Al-Waqiyah. In this particular ayat, they are surrounded. Over there, they are in the midst. Surrounding is being discussed of the deniers in this particular ayat because Allah Ta'ala is trying to remind you, you're being surrounded here because He surrounded you with His blessing in section 1. In Surah Rahman, He surrounded you with blessings in section 1 in this world. In this punishment section, He's surrounding you with the flames and the scalding water. But in Al-Waqiyah, with a different, slightly different context, there, those on the left, that is the deniers of 55 on the left in Surah Waqiyah, are already in the midst of the scorching winds and scalding water, which if you were to dwell on Surah Waqiyah, you will find that it makes sense that they are in the midst of it there, while surrounding in there. The idea is the same, but the surah's context is being maintained. In Surah 55 in one fashion, in Surah 56 in another fashion. It is because of that that when Brother Mamdu introduced Waqiyah, he kind of went back and forth a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken, memory serves me right, on Surah Al Rehman also, because the two of them have similarities of this sort in style. A final observation on this section, by the way. The treatment of the deniers in Ar-Rahman's blessings here is dealt with quite briefly, 31 through 45, 15 ayat, and swiftly in this surah, unlike their treatment that is described in other places in the Quran. The deniers' description in other parts of the Quran goes on for much longer, much more comprehensively. Here, it is being done swiftly. Why? 30 ayat are dwelling on the blessings in this world. And about 30 plus ayat are referred to for the rewards. This surah is about blessings in this world for humankind, rewards for you in the afterworld. But because you cannot talk about those unless you talk about punishment, it is dealt with here as well. But it is done with only 7 refrains and very quickly within 15 ayat. And then there follows a longer description of what is a more important matter in Surah Al-Rahman, as I just mentioned, the reward of the believers who did not deny any and all of the favors that the refrain was pertaining to throughout this surah. This then leads us to the third section. Now, the third section, as you see, I say ayat 46 through 61. And the reason for that, Ar-Rahman's rewards in the hereafter for those who did not deny his favors in this world, the refrain appears 8 times here, because the refrain appears additional 8 times from ayat 62 through 77, because this particular section 3 is for the rewards of those who believed in those blessings, but it is of 2 kinds of believers, okay? So 46 through 61, rewards in the hereafter for the first class of believers, and the other one for the less excellent, believers nevertheless, believers. In this particular section, there is a gradation of believers, which appears also in Surah Waqia. So again, as before, I will not go through the refrains again and again, but I will just give the translation 46 through 61 of the other ayats. There are two gardens for those who fear the time they will stand before the God, before Allah, before their Lord, with shading branches, with a pair of flowing springs, with every kind of fruits in pairs. They will sit on couches upholstered with brocade, the fruit of both gardens with easy reach. There will be maidens restraining their glances, untouched beforehand by man or jinn, like rubies and brilliant pearls. Shall the reward of good be anything but good? This very condensed. I dealt in section 2 about the condensed form of the verses. I'm not dealing with them here because the subject matter gets very long. But look at this, I mean, like rubies and brilliant pearls, aesthetically sound, okay, very robust in pairing it, rubies and pearls, but talking about the subject matter, which many translations have gone and run amok with it. Shall the reward of good be anything but good? This is a particular ayat that I will remind you again as we move forward with this. Anyway, let me move on. The believers are divided into two classes. The pious believers are dealt with in 46 through 61. The structure of pairs is maintained, and so is the structure of the refrain. So, as the guilty who denied the judgment and punishment were shown to suffer between two torments of fire and boiling water in the previous section, here those who fear standing before their Lord for judgment will enjoy two gardens. وَمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِمْ, it was in yeah, in Mulk, I see. No. I'm referring to the ones in Naziat, maybe. Yeah, Naziat. It refers to the same thing. Those who are standing in awe of or fear of Allah, they are the ones. And so there is one cross-reference in Surah Naziat to this as well. But anyway, they will enjoy two gardens, okay? The structure of pairs is maintained, the guilty who denied them, and now here are the believers. The pious believers are dealt with in 46 through 61, and they will be dealt with in the remaining ayat also. So these believers are being given two gardens to enjoy. Now, we noted in the earlier part of the surah that the Lord's blessings in the world surrounded them from above and below. Heaven raised, while the Quran and Mizan coming down from it. We talked about in section 2. The earth stabilized and the plants coming up from it, from east and west, on land and sea. The contrast duality. Note is N-O-T-E, note. Note in the hereafter, the two gardens are on the right and the left. From above them, there are abundant branches for shade and fruits. 76:14 is a cross-reference. Each has a running fountain from below, 85:11. And each garden and every fruit is of two kinds. Okay. Cross-referencing, pointing out contrast, pointing out pairs. The contrast, the pairs, when in Arabic sounding elongated, the on, all those coming together in pretty much all these ayats. The style maintained throughout. The pious sit on couches under them, with the fruit of both gardens hanging within reach above them. Again, a pair, a contrast. The lining of the couches is brocade, but the exterior is left to the imagination. They will be there with their spouses. 36:56 cross-reference. The spouses are chaste and untouched by any before them, and they have luster of ruby and the whiteness of brilliant pearls. I don't want to go into this because people have run amok with this by Huris, this and that, describing them in a fashion that doesn't appeal to me. This is the most appropriate, I think, the most serene translation. The spouses are chaste and untouched by any before them, and they have luster of ruby and whiteness of brilliant pearls. The guilty were shown in earlier ayat to be suffering from above and below, seized by their forelocks and feet, suffer from both sides the hellfire and boiling water. The pious in ayat now are under consideration, are seen as finding enjoyment from both sides in the two gardens and from above and below. Whereas the guilty will roam between hellfire and scalding water, the pious will be resting. There are no spouses for guilty, and the contrast with the pious is obvious. The rewards for pious souls are concluded with the testimony of their Lord that they have done good work. Which shall the reward of good be anything but good? This is how this particular section ends. Shall the reward of good work be anything but good? These are the pious of the first kind. Ayat 62 through 77. Remember, there are 78 ayats. Ayat 62 through 77 are Rahman's rewards in the hereafter for those who did not deny his favors in this world. The refrain appears here 8 times. 8 times in the first part of the rewards, 8 times here, 16 times the refrain appears here. Again, I'll only go through the ayats which are not the refrain ayats. There are 2 other gardens below these 2. 2 other gardens below these 2, both of deepest green, with a pair of gushing springs, with fruits, date palms and pomegranate trees. There are good-natured, beautiful maidens, dark-eyed, sheltered in pavilions, untouched beforehand by man or jinn. They will sit on green cushions and fine carpets. Remember, one particular ayat in the previous one does not have a parallel here. What was that one? For those who have done good, there is good. I've forgotten now that ayat. Anyway, I'll come back to it. So the 2 gardens described in these ayat, 60 through 62 through 77 are for the second class of believers and are lower in rank or quality min dunihima, as can be seen by the comparison. Now, these are nuanced comparisons, mind you. These gardens, 62 through 77, for those who are the second class of believers, second class, not like the second class or economy class of the plane. In other words, there is a degree, Allah Ta'ala has decreed in this, there is a degree of those. And it appears in Surah Baqiyah also. They're just lower in rank, but they are still believers who are all getting rewards. These gardens here are green. The first ones are abounding. The water here is bubbling. Over there, it's flowing serenely in the first part. There is only fruit here. In the other, there is variety of every fruit, 2 kinds. Here, there are simply fruit in the garden. In the earlier gardens, the fruit on the branches above them is within reach. The descriptions of maidens and the cushions are also of a lesser order. There are couches rather than cushions. The blessings in the earlier 2 gardens are more encompassing from above and below than here. As well, the divine testimony of them having done well is reserved for those in the first garden. What could be there but good for those who have done good in the first world? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that particular ayat differentiates between these 2 categories. Okay, He remains silent for the second class of believers in that particular ayat. There is no parallel of that particular ayat. The divine testimony of their having done well, what could it be here for them but good, is reserved for those in the first garden. Wallahu alam. He knows best. But this is how it is in this particular section. That there are two classes of gardens for two classes of believers fits well now with the pairing scheme that is evident throughout the surah, and so we note that the pairing structure is maintained in this section as well, as in the refrain. As is the refrain, it is also maintained here. One may observe by way of confirmation that the next surah, 56, Al-Waqiyah, brings in a parallel description of two classes of garden. One for those that are nearest to Allah, and the other for the companions of the right hand. Over there, companions of the left hand are akin to the ones who denied, that were discussed in section 2. Then there were those who were nearest to Allah, the first degree of believers, and the other for the companions of the right hand. There was a slight difference between the gradations of the rewards in Al-Baqiyah also. Some commentators have thought the four gardens in Surah Al Rehman could be for the same believers. This, when looked at in parallel with Surah Al-Waqiyah, is refuted by the categorical distribution of Surah Al-Waqiyah. As well, it does not make sense. How can the Lord, owner of majesty and bestower of honor upon his creation, say to a favored believer, I have given you these two excellent gardens as a reward for your good work? Ayats 46 through 60. And in addition, I'm giving you these two less excellent ones, 77. No, it is for two categories of believers, both of them honored, but one being nearest to Allah, as it says in Surah Waqiyah. Here it says, can the reward for those who have done good be anything but good? That is his way of saying these are the ones nearest to Allah in Surah Al-Baqiyah. Finally, one must note that there is a difference between Jannah and Al-Jannah in the next life. Jannah means a garden, bustan. Al-Jannah means paradise, as opposed to hell. Looked at this way, we can talk about the believers being contained, all of them, believers, in Al-Jannah, paradise, and in paradise, each of them having within Al-Jannah, the paradise, a Jannah, a garden, Jannatain, two gardens, or Jannat, several gardens. Look at the Quran. It speaks in dozens of instances about the believers being in Al-Jannah, paradise, or in Jannat, gardens, or in Jannatain, two gardens, as witnessed here in Surah Al Rehman. One should not dwell deeply on this item, oh, Jannah is for this, Jannah is for that. You should first know there is Jannah, there are Jannat, and there is Jannatain. All these three, singular, dual, and plural, is spoken of for the believers in various parts of the Quran. It just so happens that in these two particular ayats, it is talking about the two kinds of believers. And so there is this unique item, the unique reference to the believers in Surah Waqiyah and Surah Rahman in this particular fashion. But it does not take away from the rewards of all believers. Once you start cross-referencing in various areas of the Quran, you will find indeed that there are gardens and gardens, gardens within garden, that is, gardens within paradise for believers in the hereafter. As in Surah Rahman, the proportion of excellence in the descriptions of the dwelling places of the two classes of believers is maintained in Surah Al-Waqiyah as well, and parallel descriptions and contrasts are also seen. I'm going to show you here three instances. I'm not going to dwell on it because it doesn't do justice. One has to really reflect upon these two surah to get really the essence of it. But just to illustrate, here are three instances. One denotes higher class of believers, two denotes the second class of believers, okay? So very quickly, there are two columns here, Surah 55 Al-Rahman, Surah 56 Al-Waqiyah. And 1 and 2 is, 1 is first level of believers, 2 is second level of believers. So looking at the left one, Surah Rahman, min kul fakihatin zawjan, of every fruit, 2 kinds, first level of believers. Second level of believers, fakihatun wa nakhlun wa rumman, fruits, palm trees and pomegranates. Surah Waqia, wa fakihatin mimma yatakhayyarun, with fruits, any that they may select for the first level of believers. Wa fakihatin kathira, and plenty of fruit, second level of believers. Second example, Vajanal Jannatain Dan, the fruit of 2 gardens, first level of believers, Surah Rahman. Fihima fakihatun, in both gardens there is fruit, for second level of believers. Surah Al-Waqia, Vayatuful, I write in English and I myself, Vayatuf alayhim, and then goes on, Bi wafakihatin. Youths will go around serving them with fruit near at hand. First class of believer, waqia. Second class of believers, wafakihatin, and fruit. Third one, hal jaza al ihsan illa al ihsan. Shall the reward of good work be any but good? First level of believers, Surah Rahman. No mention for the second of believers. Remember, I was mentioning you this particular ayat. No, nothing for this. Surah Al-Waqiyah, Jazan bima kanu ya'malun, a reward for what they have done. First level of believers, Surah Waqiyah, none in for the second class of believers. Allah knows best why this, but He has differentiated in the grades of believers. And this particular ayat, which I further allude to, this one, He has left it like that. So once again, the third example, laboring on this here, hal jaza al ihsan illa al ihsan, shall the reward of good work be any but good? First class of believers, no mention for the second class of believers. Surah Al-Waqiyah, jaza bima kanu ya'malun, a reward for what they have done. First class of believer, no mention for the second class of believer, the ones in the right hand. Notice here in the third example that the special class has a special reward. Shall the reward of good work be anything but good? 55, Rahman, ayat 60. This is paralleled by a reward for what they used to do, Surah Waqia, ayat 24. This comment, however, is not made on the rewards of class 2 in either surah. First one, in Surah Al Rehman, the second class of believer, here it's the people on the right hand. People on the right hand. This comment, however, is not made on the rewards of class 2 in either surah. This extra reward is confirmed by such Quranic statements as appear in Surah Yunus, for instance. لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. Those who did well will have the best reward and more besides. A cross-reference again to that particular ayat that appears in Surah Rahman and Surah Waqiyah, 60 and 24 respectively. Okay. So now we went through 77, and here is the last ayat. A single verse concludes the surah. Blessed is the name of your Lord, full of majesty, bestowing honor. Again, third person. Third person again. First section, third person, second section, and third section, first person. That one's third person, second and third section, first person, we. The surah ends again with the same way it started. Ar-Rahman, third person. Blessed is the name of your Lord, full of majesty, bestowing honor. Okay. Note that this ayat is addressed in the second person singular to the Prophet, then to the reader when you read, to the listener when you're listening. As such, it is not followed by the refrain which is addressed to both men and jinn. There is no pair here. Because there is no pair here, there is no refrain coming in. It is just talking about Ar-Rahman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is addressed in the second person. I misspoke. It's addressed in the second person to the Prophet or to you. or to the one who is listening, there is no pair here. It is the end of the surah. Recall that the first time the refrain was made was when men and jinn to whom the refrain was addressed were referred to in the word al-anam. This was in ayat 10. Men and jinn were not referred to up until ayat 9. They were not even referred to per se in ayat 10 as men and jinn, but as part of the creatures, al-anam. The only factors that decided that the refrain would appear 31 times in this surah were the pairing scheme and the sequence of the specific themes developed within the context of the surah. The pairing scheme, for whatever reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided as a style in this Quran, and the fact that there were 3 sections, and those 3 sections just happened to have enough righteous space to appear for this refrain 31 times, and that is it. Much has been said, why 31, this and that. This is how I have read, this is how I understand, this is why there is it for 31 times. Once the sequence was completed with the pairing scheme, there was no more need for the refrain to occur any more time. As such, no refrain appears after ayat 77, after ayat 78. And this final one, ayat 78, the last verse, is a comment that glorifies Allah's name Ar-Rahman. By way of, again, interrelationships, note that such a comment is observed in the Quran in other similar situations. Al-Waqiyah, last verses. This is the certain truth. Prophet, glorify the name of your Quran, of your Lord the Supreme. As-Saffat, last verses. Your Lord, the Lord of glory, is far above what they attribute to him. Praise be to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Yasin, last verse. So glory be to him in whose hand lies control over all things. See the beautiful contrast of cross references towards the end of this surah, paralleling the end of this surah. A final comment. Even in this final comment of the last verse, we find a pair of adjectives that maintain the scheme to the last. Lord of majesty and of honoring. His majesty shown in his creation and his disciplining those that deny his all-encompassing blessings, and his honoring shown in his bestowing honor with blessings in this world and in the next. Verse 1, finally verse 78, and the verse 27 that appeared in the section 1, which we did the last time, are all exclusive to Allah. These are the only 3 verses in this Quran that appear in these 3 verses. Was their strategic placement in the surah where they appear first, last, and towards the end of enumeration of blessings, Zul Jalal wal Ikram. These 3 ayat fuse, as it were, all of Surah Al Rehman into one single unity.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك اللهم لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت. اللهم ادخلنا برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين. اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الجهل والوهم إلى نور العلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم اكفنا بحلالك عن حرامك وبطاعتك عن معصيتك وفضلك عن من سواك. اللهم بفضلك ورحمتك أعلي كلمة الحق والدين. اللهم انصر الإسلام وعز المسلمين يا أكرم الأكرمين. O Allah, spread your mercy upon us, shower us with your blessings, increase our knowledge, grant us forgiveness, and reward us with the company of the prophets in the Firdaus al-A'la. O Allah, forgive our parents and all our friends and relatives who have passed away. O Allah, make their graves guarded from heaven and grant them the Firdaus al-A'la. O Allah, we have many of our friends and relatives who are sick. We have our son Ma'raj, our daughter Aishawani, our grandson Isa. Oh Allah, grant all of them full and speed recovery. Oh Allah, guide our children, protect them, and make them righteous. Oh Allah, we seek from you all of the good, whether we know it or we don't. And we seek your refuge from all evil, whether we know it or we don't. Oh Allah, we have many of our brethren who are suffering from injustice and oppression. Oh Allah, heal their trauma, protect their helpless, and grant them peace and prosperity. Oh Allah, we ask you every name that you elected for yourself, that none of us leave this gathering, but his pains have been relieved, his worries have been removed, his debts have been paid, his weaknesses have been concealed, his sins have been forgiven, and his needs have been fulfilled. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.